Hey there, it's Robin, and you're listening to Healthy Habits for a Healthier Home. I'm here to help you create a healthier life, one simple shift at a time. If you're a mama ready to ditch toxins, clean up your family's nutrition, and build daily habits that support your well-being, you're definitely in the right place. Each episode is packed not only with education, but practical tips and tools to help you transform your health and your home without that feeling of overwhelm. So let's take this journey together to create a thriving, low-tox home for you and your family. If you're ready, say, I am ready. Now let's get into this episode. Hey, welcome back. I'm so excited to welcome Lynette Reiling today. She's going to speak directly to this midlife empty nesting chapter that we're heading into or are in or just stepping into. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm going to enjoy our conversation.
I can't wait. So let's just start out. I gave a little intro, but why don't you just let people know who you are and how have you gotten to where you are? You definitely have a lot of wisdom around this.
Actually, I'm probably older than most of your listeners and have lived some life. I ended up writing a book. It just came out, and it was a accumulation of a lot of years worth of experience. I've been a life coach for quite a while. A lot of people who are going through career transition and retirement readiness. And I worked for an organization called Boomers Leading Change, which was engaging folks age 50 plus to use their talents, skills, and experience for social good. And I did a lot of training. I was a volunteer coordinator for 8 years, and I did a lot of training of volunteers. So I had stacks and stacks and stacks of files and a lot of books on this whole midlife thing. And I just had actually checked in with a woman I'd been reading a book about, her book, and asked her if she knew of anybody that had any kind of daily reading for women at midlife. And she said, no, I really don't. I don't. And I said, well, why don't you write one? And, a couple of weeks later, I went, well, I think I'm going to write one. So
Good for you.
That's how my book happened.
I love it. Well, first of all, her book is called Your Encore Life, Take Center Stage for Life's Second Half, which is amazing.
That's my book.
That's your book. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And so if you want to pick that up, you can get it at Amazon. But I want to talk to, you said I'm a little bit older, and I have come up with this great understanding that when we're growing, that we need to have people in our community, in our circle that have come before us, that are right where we're at and that haven't gone or just, first dipping their toe in. And so we can give back and then we can get from. And I think that's really one of the most beautiful ways to grow yourself is to be not just with people of the same mindset, but a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am so fortunate. I have 2 or 3 women that are ahead of me as far as age, and I still look to them for their wisdom. And I have women that are no longer on this planet that I look to how they've lived their life, and they've provided a model for me. I call it breadcrumbs.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've left breadcrumbs for me to follow.
Which is so true. And I think sometimes we, as we're living a very busy, chaotic lifestyle, which is most of us until we kind of get to a certain chapter of life.
Or maybe not even then.
Well, that's true too. But when we can get to that point, I think some of those breadcrumbs start to appear, and we start to realize, oh, that's what that meant. Or, oh, now I see why that happened. Or I think a lot of times we don't sit with things long enough to try to find an understanding. But eventually it comes because it has to show itself at some point, right?
Well, I mean, especially if you've got your Nikes on and you're running like a crazy woman, with a lot of mothers are doing.
Mm-hmm. So what have you learned? Like, what are some of your greatest takeaways now that you are in empty nesting, in more of retirement age? What are some golden nuggets that you could give us wisdom wise that you've learned?
Well, I think one of the biggies is our relationship to caregiving. Some of us take on that role as really little girls or young girls, depending on the kind of family we grow up in. I was the oldest of 4. My mom was 42 when she unexpectedly had twins. And so I became a mother when I was 8 and, really took on that caregiving role in a really big way and have had to work really hard at letting go of that role. It's taken me more than a little time because it's such a big carrot. So I think becoming aware of what triggers you to step into that role as the caregiver is a huge piece. Another piece I think is really important is what's your relationship to giving to yourself? There's a continuum. So there are women who are absolutely selfless. So their whole world is about taking care of everybody else, and they're always last on the list, so they never even get to themselves. And on the other end is people who are selfish. They always place themselves first and everybody else comes second. But somewhere in the middle is being self-full. And I think that is a really important concept to consider when you're a mom, because that is not an easy thing, taking care of yourself as a mom.
Yeah, so true. And mothering, again, was one of the most beautiful chapters of my life. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. But nobody came before me to tell me, remember yourself during this time too. And it took me years, decades before I, started to understand that. And I think I just love what you just said, between the lack of self and then being selfish and being self-full. And I think, we so often think of if we put ourselves first, we're being selfish,
Absolutely.
and it's not selfish, it's self-full. I love that.
Yeah.
And I love the flip and reframe of that.
The idea of selfish oftentimes comes from the conditioning we've had from a really young age. And especially, I have a bias about this, but I think especially being female. I'm not so sure how many little boys are ever told, don't be so selfish. But I think little girls hear that a lot.
Yeah. The other thing I really, really loved that you said was the trigger, finding what triggers you to step into that caregiving role. And, I am the caregiver. I am a caregiver to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I was always the one who played house when I was little. I always wanted to babysit. I always wanted to be a mom. I was a teacher. Like I'm just innately, it's just part of who I am. But I do think some of that comes healthy and some of it's unhealthy, depending on what the trigger is that sends you to do that particular thing.
Absolutely. And just, we step into roles. And the role of mom is just so huge. It never goes away, but it has to transform to be able to be healthy.
Yes. And a lot of my audience and a lot of my community is either just stepping into empty nesting or they're just kind of fully in it just for a short amount of time. And so it's an adjustment period. There's a lot of emotions that come up. There's a lot of who I am. What do I want to be again when I grow up? Feeling like the mother role was ripped away. There's just so much emotional, mental stuff to deal with. But what I like to reframe is that you're not losing being a mom, but your relationship as a mom.
It's the relationship.
Yeah. It's different because now you're momming older kids, but your kids will always need you. They just need you in a different capacity. And so it's just being able to pivot and shift to that capacity to understand that it's greater than tying their shoes and making their lunch. These are like now profound, bigger problems or things that they'll come to you with for you to not solve for them, but for you to support them through.
It is a maturing process. A relationship, that's a maturing process. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
You're going through a whole interesting time right now in dealing with your mom. That's, we have to let go of a lot of roles at midlife, but we also gain new roles that maybe we didn't think we were going to have at midlife. And there's some huge identity shifts that can happen in all of it. And there can be a big sense of loss and grief in letting go of some of those identities that maybe we've carried with us for the whole first chunk of our lives.
Right, for sure. And I think speaking on that topic for me, even, when my dad was alive, I always went to the appointments. I was always that person doing that. And so naturally, when my dad passed, there would be no way that I would just allow my mom to go into a home because she couldn't live by herself. And so she lived with us. But unfortunately, I did not have the tools or the wherewithal to be what she needed. And so it was messy. And so my health ended up taking, the back seat. And so she eventually went into assisted living, and it took me 2 years to kind of get myself back, my health back in order, and then understanding what had transpired really. And then this previous year, her health declined. So she is back with us. But I will say, being in a different place mentally and physically and emotionally has allowed me to separate myself, because I want to give her the space to live here so that we can provide her with the care that she needs, but I don't have to be the full-time caregiver. And I think for me, recognizing that and being able to separate that out and having caregivers come and help take care of my mom so that I can still have a life and still have the things that I need to be whole and human and not sick. I was okay with letting go, where I think the first time around, I would never have been okay with that. So again, everything happens.
Yeah. One of the things that we saw often in hospice was that the caregiver it was so stressful, and well, you know what this is all about. You've lived it. And they end up getting sick. And sometimes if it's an older adult, like in spouse situations, they die within months or a short period of time from the time that the person they're taking care of dies. It's an incredibly stressful role to take on. And you have to learn how to take care of yourself. You have to learn how to ask for help.
Yes. And I think that for me, it was a big lesson in all of that, was just accepting and acknowledging that I didn't have to be all things for everybody.
Well, that's being Superwoman.
And I just think, again, when you are in a mom role, and I'm not discounting the dad at all, because it doesn't matter. And whether you work or don't work, the mother takes on the mental part. Even if the husband's helping 50% with driving the kids to school, the mental part of thinking about the kids all day, every day, making sure they're okay and they're safe and they're not, all of that takes up more space than the doing. It's just
absolutely setting up the schedules and figuring it all out, and figuring out Johnny's schedule, Susie's schedule, his schedule, my schedule, putting them all together. Absolutely. It is. Sometimes that's actually doing the action is the easiest part.
Right. Exactly. That's so true. I love that. So what are some of the things in your book that you wrote about that you want to talk about that you feel like are the golden nuggets to kind of take away? Don't give away everything, obviously, but just, what are a couple of things that, when you think about your book, really stand out to you as good teachable moments or tools or tips for somebody to be able to take away today?
Well, the book is put together on the model by William Bridges in his book Transitions. So there's ending, there's a neutral zone, and there's a new beginning. And so talking about endings, it's like, what is your relationship to change? What do you do with an ending? Or do you ignore it? Do you stay in it longer than you need to? What's your relationship to change and endings? And even understanding your style to endings is a really important piece, because we are going to experience endings our whole life. And being aware of what that is really important. I think another part of the book is about the middle part. I'm not who I was, but I don't yet know who I'm going to be. And boy, if that isn't a great descriptor for women who are leaving this first half of life and being a mom and all that entails. But then, well, who am I going to be if I'm not going to be a mom? If I don't have to take my kid to track every day and take him to school and all those things, then who am I? And I think trying to understand and navigate that middle piece is really important. And I know for myself, I went through some big changes all at once about 3 years ago, actually during the pandemic. Excuse me. I sold a home of 25 years. I moved to a new community, a whole different part of the state. My job ended. So, everything about who I thought I was, who I said I was, even relationships, the grocery store guy, they were gone. And I needed time to just be, which is the middle part of transition. It's not a doing time, it's being time. And after I got moved in, got my toothbrush put away and painted everything, I was starting to get from my daughter and my sisters, well, why don't you start doing swim lessons? Mom, the rec center is having a class on all the things that senior citizens can do. And I really had to just go, stop right now. I just need to be. But they were looking at me from my old life. I'm a big time doer. And that's what they were looking at me through, is this old life of mine. And they didn't know what to do with this person that was in the middle. Yeah. And then there's new beginnings. And a lot of my book is about new beginnings. And I call them script writing tools that women can use to write this second half of their life. Things like rebellion, courage, self-compassion, forgiveness, intention, creativity, all those kinds of energies that are so essential in writing the script for the second half of your life.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was so good. I mean, so good because it's just so true and so relatable. And, what I want to really hone in on is the just being, because women, mothers in general, they do, but they just don't know how to be. And that is so uncomfortable. Like when you're first learning how to just be, it's super uncomfortable because you haven't done it yet. You haven't practiced the skill. You don't know what it's going to be like. It's going to bring up stuff that you're like not wanting to look at, right? Or face, but it's your greatest growth opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's reframing too, like reframing that just being isn't a bad thing.
Well, but the secret sauce is that in the being, there's inner realignment that's happening. So if you looked at the person on the outside, you don't see much of anything looking different, but there are things that are happening on the inside that are creating shifts. There's letting goes, there's questioning, there's going through a period of disorientation, which is part of ending. And boy, talk about disorientation when you've been a mom for 18 or 20 or 25 years, and that's been your main focus, is taking care of those kids and getting them where they have to be. And all of a sudden that's gone. That orientation is like, so it's an inner realignment that happens first. And then at some point in time, something happens that signals the start of a new beginning.
But that something's going to be different for everybody. Something that you have me thinking a lot about, and listening to you speak about all of that, is that we're made for community. We as humans are made for community. And I think one of the disadvantages of the amazing world in which we live, where we can live anywhere and do anything and be whatever, it's like we have, distanced ourselves from family units. If you think back to, whatever year that was, I don't know, but where families grew up, but other family members were always there. So the moms whose kids went off had the kids of the other people, and they were able to still have connection. And I think that's the one thing that gets lost when you go from momming to not having your kids at home. It's just that the community, the connection gets kind of frazzled. And then it's like trying to figure out, where do I fit, right? Like, where is my next community going to come from? And I think that's so important.
Well, so much of the community experience that we experience as our children are growing up is community that's connected to the kids, the soccer team. So it's the moms, it's, and I even noticed with my kids, once they hit junior high going into high school, there weren't very many opportunities anymore to be involved as a parent. So
that's changed, because nowadays there's so many like club sports and this sports and like school sports and school, they pull the parents in. And so the parents, I think there's a happy medium, right? It's a time for the kids to pull away and a time for you to start to volunteer. But maybe not as often, or, it looks different, but I know what you're saying. And I say this all the time, like when you have babies, you find those mom groups for survival, and then you have the kid groups, and then you have the high school, like team groups, and then you have nothing. So,
well, I think there's something else that's happening that you sort of hit on when you started talking about community, is that so many families live away from the rest of their families,
right.
away from, especially daughters living away from their moms. So that sense of, mom, what's next? And how do I do this? Daily grabbing a phone call or having a cup of coffee together just isn't there.
But I think that for me, at least, my goal as a mom of adult children is to continue to foster relationships with them so that they want to come back, to call me, to have the coffee, even if it's not every day, obviously, but as they adventure out into the world, their safe place to fall is always going to be with us. And so,
not always easy to do.
No, it's not, for sure. But I feel like that's how the mom role shifts, because
absolutely,
you're not giving them full guidance anymore. They're guiding themselves, and you just have to be there and be okay with just being there for the things, and
yeah. One of my biggest challenges, it still is, I mean, my kids are 47 and 49. Hard to say that. Is instead of just dropping it on them, to ask them, do you want my advice?
Oh, yes, for sure.
And it is real easy to just start going blah, 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 and giving the advice without asking first.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
No, for sure. And I think that's something that we could back up to the earlier days. And I was just talking with somebody about this. It's like when we give advice, unwelcomed advice, I would say, we're taking the power away from them to be their own advocate, to be their own person, to speak for themselves. And so it's more, I am trying to learn to more question and have them think for themselves, and that's more of a facilitator. I mean, I was a teacher and then I was a facilitator, and I feel like that takes on more of the coach, guidance, facilitator role of like not giving the information, but just prompting by questioning to get them to think through. Because I mean, obviously at 49, they have a fully developed mind, but when you're talking about 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, their minds are they're not really adults. Let's be honest. They're getting there, and they're taking some steps, and they are caring for themselves, and they're getting themselves to school. They're doing the things, right? They're going to work, whatever it is. But mentally, they're just not fully aware and capable and able to do all the adulting things quite yet.
Right.
But it is about giving them the autonomy to make the decisions.
I don't think that starts at 20. I think that starts at 13.
Oh, yes.
In their, or even grade school, as to what's appropriate, but to talk about situations. I don't know, this might be way before your group, but we used to have a consequence book. And so before the kids had a new piece of freedom in their lives, whatever it might be, we would sit down and go, okay, so say a curfew. We would sit down and go, so what do you think is appropriate for you for a curfew at this stage of your life? We're talking mid-teens when they're starting to go out and whatever.
Driving.
Yeah. And we would make a determination, and we would write it in the consequence book, date it, and everybody had to sign it. And so inevitably, the first time they come home beyond curfew, instead of screaming and hollering and crack open the consequence book and go, this is what we decided on. And so my job and my husband's job was to follow through with the consequence, whatever it might be. But they knew ahead of time, and they could choose it. I mean, they could choose the consequence.
It's funny because I think being a teacher, that's a lot of how my mindset was. And we had a lot of those conversations. You have very different children, right? You have one that knows the consequence and is like, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to get the consequence. Why would I do that? And then you have the other ones like, ooh, I'm going to come home 5 minutes late and just see if I can push the boundary of the consequence just a tiny, tiny bit. And it's like, we're going to go through. I mean, I'm like, I am 100% if you do this and this is the consequence, it's going to happen. So why do you keep inviting that into your life? Like, why? And it's not my fault because we already agreed on it, so, but oh Lord, it's like personality really matters to some of those things.
Yes, it does.
So
I had
I
one
love
kid
that.
pretty compliant, and the other one that was always pushing me out the edge.
Yeah. And they're both going to be fine, right? They're both going to end up being
Yeah.
successful, happy, great adults in the long run, which I love. Um, One of the things that you said was that your life path had been anything but a straight line, and underneath you had the desire to advocate, educate, and inspire others. So what led you to want to do that after coming into this stage of your life?
Well, I went through a process about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's Simon Sinek and it's what is your why? And I went through that process within a group setting. So we each did our own why, and then we created a group why. Part of that process is going back over stories in your life, in people that were important to you, in events that were important to you, and look for threads. And from there, going through this process to put your why together. So, what you just said, to advocate, educate, and inspire others so they feel empowered to live their best lives possible. I have done that my whole life, but it's just not been conscious. But when I look back over my life, everywhere where I've felt fulfilled, everything I've done as far as my work life has all been around that why. So, even though finally stating it, realizing it and stating it might not be that many years old, I've done it for my whole life. We develop that in our teens, but oftentimes it's living back here in the unconscious.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. And I love the part that you were speaking about the threads, because I do think if we can be and sit long enough with ourselves to look for those things, they are there. But like
They
you
are.
said, they're just not coming to the forefront because you have a lot of chaotic other things happening and going on that you're not able to see what exactly they are.
And sometimes it's to be able to share your stories with somebody who has been trained to be able to listen for the threads or the themes, and whatever you want to call it. They're there. They are there.
It reminds me a lot of like your essence, like who you were,
Mm-hmm.
who you have been your whole life, your dharma, your purpose, all of those things lead you to discover your why, really. And those are, I feel like, the threads of what you should be looking for. But unfortunately, I think what has happened over decades is that we've had a lot of conditioning, right? We've had conditioning from school and from parental, boundaries, and from work jobs and from school friends and not so good people, and it's like you have a lot of these things coming in and out of your world to kind of muddle through, if you will. And so it starts to build a story within that might not be your authentic story. It's just things that you've picked up along the way that you have to. And especially now coming into this midlife, and I'll just speak from my experience, like coming into like postmenopause and all of it, I don't have time for that anymore. Like, I don't know. My whole physiological being is changed. And I just have come into this thing where it's like, I know who I am now. Like, I knew all along, but maybe I didn't articulate it well. But it's like, I've known she's been there the whole time. It's just been more of a quiet stepping and, finding my footing, I think. And now physiologically, whatever changes happen in your body, which is a lot, I'm more apt to talk about those whys and who I am and be okay with it, I think.
One of the script writing tools I have in my book is self-mastery.
I love that.
And it is the ability for a woman to author her own life. And to be able to do that means letting go of a lot of the conditioning, expectations, roles from the first half of our life, so that we can truly, in the moment, authentically begin writing our life script for the second half of life.
I love that.
Trusting our own decisions, just self-mastery.
Yeah, for sure. And decisions for you.
Yeah.
And not because you're doing it for other people, right? For you also.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of self-mastery.
Yeah. I love that. One of the things you had said earlier was like courage, rebellion, joy. And I think one of the things when we're looking to new beginnings, especially in this phase of life, we have to start questioning, like what brings me joy? Where do I find, where do I like spending my time? What is it that I want to, everybody has something to offer to the world. And it's like, what is your piece of that? And then how do you want to put that into play? But
Mhm.
at the same time, being playful and childlike and going back to some of those old things that we used to do. Not that you're going to be that same person, because obviously you've lived too much life in between to go back pre-kids. And who wants to do that anyways? Because it's like you've come through something to be a better version of yourself. And, but it's like, what did we used to do that was fun, and maybe it's riding bikes, or maybe it's tennis, or maybe it's just something you've put on the back burner, crocheting or scrapbooking or painting, or, all the different things. And if you have nothing, then I always suggest, just what is one thing that pops in your mind that you maybe always wanted to try, but you just didn't have the courage to do it? And it might be a painting class, it might be a pottery class, it might be a book club, and again, it's getting enough wherewithal to start questioning yourself, to then find some answers that will help you start the wheel on for that new beginning.
Talk about the mad scientist in my book.
Okay. I love that.
Picture a woman in her lab coat, in her lab, and all the bubbling stuff and so forth. And so she tries something out, sees how it works, evaluates and goes, yep, that's it. No, this isn't quite. I need to tweak it a little more. And she tries the next thing. And so going into the second half of life, we need to be scientists.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to experiment. You have to try things. I say that all the time. So my whole thing is 1% shifts. It's like, try something on, see how it feels. If you like it, add it to your, tool belt for your 1% shifts that become your non-negotiables, so that you have a better life. And it's like, not everything is going to work for everybody. And so it is about trying something on. And I like the mad scientist, because I can picture the lady,
Yeah, she's cute. Deal.
I love that. I think that's awesome.
Stuff she learns.
So before we kind of wrap up, I'm just curious, as you have lived this second part of your life, which, you're in it, you're not past it, but you're in it. What is a pivotal thing that you would, outside of your book, but like that you would share for people just newly stepping in? If you could look back now to that age group of, 40, 50-year-olds, probably 45, 55, that are stepping into the empty nest. Who am I? Kind of in the being, but almost past the being, or needing to incorporate a beginning into it.
Wow, that's a big question. How much time do I have?
As long as you need.
I think it comes down to taking the time to become self-aware. And sometimes that means finding somebody else that can help you with that process. It's like we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of things are unconscious. I talk about, I have my book set up like it's like a play. And we have everything that's going on in front of the curtain that we can see when we go to a play. But there's a whole lot going on behind the curtain that has just a whole lot going on that you don't see from the audience. Well, our life is the same way, that we've got a whole lot happening behind the curtain here. And part of growing into who we are authentically into the second half of life and releasing what has to go means we have to be able to turn around and pull the curtain back and go to that unconscious place and find out what's there. Just be curious and find out what's there and do it without judgment.
Very true. And I love all that, because number one, doing it on your own doesn't necessarily bring the greatest, change. And so I think having a partner, whether it's a coach, whether it's, a therapist, whatever works for you, we're not, pick somebody, just
a woman's group. I mean, it could be
lots of things, a friend, just a friend, real. I mean, it just find somebody though that, can help you navigate some of those parts and pieces, because pulling back that curtain is a big job.
Huge.
It
can be,
but it is a big job. But if you go in with the right lens and you're looking at it in a particular way, which typically somebody walks you through, you can find such good pieces of wisdom and nuggets of things that will show you what's been protecting you all these years, but might not no longer be serving you.
Yes. And I think that is a big chunk of this letting go of the first half of life is, what have been my protections, and to honor them, to thank them and honor them, because they have provide safety and protection. But coming into the second half of life, they can be totally in the way.
Right. And block you from what your growth should be or can be.
Yeah.
I love that. So as we end, I always like to ask all my guests that come on for a couple of non-negotiables that you've created in your life to help you live your best life daily.
Wow. Well, to start off, I'm 75. So a big part of moving into this stage of life is spiritual development.
I love that.
And I don't mean religious development. It is developing that crone, that wise woman.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be able to let go of the midlife superwoman to be able to start moving into that kind of elderhood. And that's kind of really where I am right now. I'm going to have a spiritual community. We meet every Friday. I do meditation daily, but that is part of my grounding place. And I don't think that has anything to do with age, but I think as we mature into this second half of life, if we want to become wise elders, if we want to be able to create a narrative for the second half of our life that's about vitality and engagement versus decline, diminishment, kind of that old narrative of aging, we have to work at it because it's always there. Our old beliefs are coming with us about aging. We get it all over the place from the outside in our marketing. So those two things I think are the biggest, just being aware what I'm talking to myself, how I'm talking to myself about this process of aging, and setting an intention to really step into this wise woman crone elderhood position.
Yeah, I love all of that. And they're such great non-negotiables because they're only going to help you to rise up even more, to help more people, because you become a better human when you are taking care of those needs for yourself.
That selfing.
That's right. I love it. This has been so enlightening, and I appreciate so much all your wisdom. I can't wait to read your book. And
thank you.
For those listening, make sure you check. I'll drop everything in the show notes, of course, but check out her book on Amazon. I think we all need a little bit of the wisdom that Lynette has poured into us. And I think that stepping into this cronehood part of life, if we can do some of the work backing up into our 50s, by the time we're up into our 70s, we'll be living that much more vibrantly, honestly. So I love that.
I think those are wise words, my dear.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. And I will talk to you guys next week.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck with your journeys. And thank you.
That episode had so many great takeaways. I hope you feel inspired and more empowered to make small 1% shifts on your wellness journey this week. I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you want to leave a review, share your thoughts, and let me know how you're going to be implementing these 1% shifts into your life. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with another mama who could use a little wellness love. Want to stay connected? Join me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Life Balanced with Robin. Check out my website at livelifebalancedwithrobin.com for more resources, and grab yourself some freebies while you're there. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and light by breathing, being present, and allowing for all possibilities to come your way. See y'all next week. Love to y'all.